Hey everyone, and welcome to the show. I'm James, that's Katie, and of course, that makes this episode 29 of Circles and Squares. Only one away from 30, Kate. Can you believe it? I feel like every episode we do, we have some kind of like, wow, I can't believe we're like at 25, or now it's like 29. All these milestone numbers just keep coming up on the horizon. And it's like, it's pretty exciting.
It is. It's really exciting, and I can't believe, people are still listening. That's wonderful, and the other thing too about it is it's just a great excuse to kinda do something fun, so I think next episode is gonna be, another special one, so
It
look
is, yeah,
forward to
for
that.
those who are listening, we won't really give any details what we're going to plan on doing yet, but it is our 1 year anniversary episode. Next one on episode number 30, which is going to be out on May 17th. So look forward to that. But yeah, Kate, how are you?
I'm great. Have a nice coffee. It's a beautiful day outside, and I have a very fun fact for you. Have you heard of Grandma Shirley Curry?
um, I wasn't expecting to be asked a question like this, but no, I've not.
Okay, so, she is the most wholesome, best person on YouTube. So it's basically Grandma Shirley is this older lady who has a YouTube channel, and she plays Skyrim,
Oh, I
and, like,
have
just
heard of her.
yeah, she's the one she has, like, playthroughs of Skyrim, and she's always, like, really wholesome, like, she kind of, like, really role plays her character. She's like, "Oh, I'm gonna be a merchant and, like, just go around and sell things," and, like, she just, like, gets into it so much, and she's just, like, the cutest, sweetest lady, and so anyway, her channel's really blown up because,
Well,
it's
obviously,
it's
yeah.
kind of novel and, like, what kind of monster wouldn't like, to watch this? So yesterday, which I guess would have been the first, someone made a because like Skyrim's got a very prolific modding community,
Oh,
and
yeah.
so someone made a proper Grandma Shirley mod, and she's actually like a follower you can get in game now.
Wow, that's shout out to you, Grandma Shirley. That's amazing.
Right, it's so nice. I'm so excited one day to be, like, old and be Grandma Shirley, like, that's my, like, retirement goals. I wanna be like I'm so inspired by her to be just like this old lady that's still playing games and, like,
Some
has
old
a
grandma
channel.
that's still
Yeah,
just playing
I wanna
Sekiro on stream every day or something.
exactly, I wanna be an old grandma who's beating, like, Sekiro 42 or whatever game is out at the time.
You'll have to live, make her legacy live on when you gain the
Mhm.
years, I guess. That's
Exactly, and
awesome.
it's gonna live on in Skyrim now, which is I think is absolutely just such a lovely, like, heartwarming fact to start the day out.
Hey, video games are cool, they do all kinds of cool things
Mhm.
like that. That awesome story. Good for you, Shamit, Grandma Shirley. If you ever want to come on the show, just send us an email. We'll get you on here as a guest. That would be awesome.
That
But
would be amazing.
oh man. Well, hey Kate, let's save some time. I know we've got a lot to talk about
Mhm.
later, in regards to a certain game in particular. So, just to give everyone a lay of the land for the episode today, we do have, of course, the first part of the show talking about the games we have been playing. After that, we'll take a break and then talk about some news, including a brand new Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart State of Play that we watched. I think it was yesterday, right? That came out. Maybe the day before. Either way,
I think it was the day before, but I mean, either way, like, it was worth watching yesterday a second time, so
it was. It absolutely was. And then to close out the show at the end, for the final segment, we will be talking about our favorite sidekicks in video games. And then ending off, of course, with a listener mail question, as we usually do. And just a reminder for everyone else out there as well, if you want to send in a listener mail question for a future episode, if you'd like to get your question read out and answered on the show, you can send us an email to circlesandsquarespod@gmail.com. Or you can find us on Twitter at CNSPod and just tweet us over there. We can answer your question that way too. So thank you to everyone that writes in, and we look forward to hearing from you. But Kate, let's start off with these PlayStation mobile games that we promised we were going to play last episode on our little discussion about mobile games. We actually didn't even know these games existed until then. We took a challenge to each take one to play and see what we thought. So I would love to hear your thoughts on Uncharted, Neck Hunter.
Yes. Well, you know what? I will say I was pleasantly surprised by Nathan Drake's, latest adventure in Uncharted Fortune Hunter. Um, I mean, it's a mobile game. I'm not a mobile gamer. It's just not my preference, and I don't, really have a really long commute, especially now where I've got time that mobile gaming would be appealing, and so I went into it with the expectations of like, I don't think this is gonna be for me, but I wanna be open-minded. And I actually think the game is pretty good. I was relatively impressed with it. So it's it's an Uncharted branded puzzle game, and you kind of it's like a little like box layout style, and you have to navigate Drake through the level and get him to the treasure at the end. And it starts off pretty simple, but it actually gets relatively complicated in terms of the puzzles. Like there's different things where you can raise or lower blocks that might get in your way, but also then they introduce like traps that shoot arrows at you, so you can then manipulate the blocks to get in the way of those traps so that Drake can have a safe path through. And they introduce things later like additional treasure you can get, but it's maybe out of the way and requires like extra puzzle solving.
Is it like those Lara Croft mobile, what is it called, Lara Croft Go, Tomb Raider Go, those kind of games, like where as you move, some stuff on the map moves like kind of in a on a board?
Yeah, it's kind of on a board. Like nothing really like moves without you. Like you're very much in control, but it's mostly about like it kind of boils down to like flipping switches and finding the right combination of things and also like order of switches to flip so that like you can create the route. Like the treasure might be blocked like behind a wall, and so like there's a way you can flip some switches to make the wall go down, but like
Mm-hmm.
in order to make that wall go down you have to get to the other side of the map, but like there's no connecting path. But then if you flip another switch, that path raises up from the ground, so like it's a lot of that kind of stuff. And like I think it was actually pretty good, and the actual like trappings of it were quite nice. Like the music is just Uncharted,
It's
so
one of the strongest things Uncharted has as a franchise, I
yeah,
think.
and so, like, I couldn't help but smile when I first turned it on and that kind of, like, like, very adventure kinda music popped in. It's been a while since I played Uncharted, but that theme is still very, memorable for me, so I like that. Like, Sully talks to you, and Nate and Sully have, like, a bit of a banter going back and forth throughout the game, and then the you kinda go on this, like, old treasure map like, the level map, and it's pretty cute. Um So I will say that I think the design is really nice. The actual art assets, I think, leave something to be desired. We've joked a lot about poor Nathan's neck in this game, and I very strongly urge everyone, if you haven't seen it, just either Google Uncharted Fortune Hunter, or like we will post many pictures on Twitter for you guys to enjoy. And like it's just the strangest character model I've ever seen. Like his shoulders are 3 times the width of his waist, and like he's got the widest V going on, which is really not flattering because his neck is
It's
unusually
disproportionately,
long.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's so funny, like, oh, it's so good, and, like, some of the, like of course, it has a shop that you go to spend stuff, and you do get an in-game currency, which I think is fine, and one of those things you can do is buy, like, outfits for Nate, so we were kinda laughing before the show looking at Mime Nate and how, like, ridiculous he
Oh,
looks.
it's something else. You just gotta go look at it, is all it is. Like,
Yeah.
and it's not even just the length of his neck either, or the broadness of his shoulders. It's also like his chest has this weird circular quality to it, which is like
Yes.
people. I don't know. Like it's one of those, like, it's not uncanny valley, but it's just like this is clearly a person, but people don't really look like this, and so it just
Yeah.
looks kind of weird.
It looks like, when you, like, give someone a test and they're like or you see online sometimes artists will do this and it's like, "This is the drawing I made of this character, like, while looking at a reference, and this is the one without a reference." And the without a reference one is like, "I can clearly see that you were trying to draw that character, but it is not the same character." And it's very much like this, like, "I can clearly see you were trying to make a person, but this is not what people look like."
Oh,
So
Nate,
that's been cracking up. Poor Nick then, I'm gonna have to play a proper Uncharted game now to
you should check
refresh my
out
my mind.
you should check out Lost Legacy, like I was telling you
I
before.
I will, and, the last thing I will say about this game is the microtransactions, because of course they're in here. It's a mobile game, you can't avoid it. And what surprised me the most, and I kind of had heard this going in, but I still was surprised that the vast majority of the microtransactions in this game are actually for Uncharted 4.
Oh, what?
And so, like, a lot of that money you can spend in this game is for getting, like, resources for the Uncharted 4 multiplayer, which struck me as very strange because it's such a weird integration, like, it's kinda cool, like, there's a few things where it's like, "Oh, get a skin for the multiplayer," and, like, that's kinda cute. I know a lot of, like, crossover games do that, like, for example, I've gotten a skin in Overwatch because I played a certain amount of Heroes of the Storm games in, like, an event time that they were doing, and it was cool because it was like, oh, like, these 2 games crossed over, right? They're, like, kind of I don't know, they're supposed to be in universe, but, like, they're made by the same developer, and it was, like, a cute event that they did. But this just kinda struck me as weird as, like, okay, like, you're like, how many people are gonna be enticed by, like, "Oh, I wanna get, like, some extra ammo on Uncharted 4, so, like, I gotta play, like."
Some extra ammo.
Yeah, it's like weird stuff like that, and then it's like, well, like, is Uncharted 4 multiplayer pay to win? Like, it's like, but also pay to win, but also play this mobile game to win? Like,
That's an interesting setup. We'd have to
yeah, so
research that.
it's kinda cool, like, I don't know, like, I didn't investigate enough to know how it works, and I've never played the Uncharted 4 multiplayer, so, like, I don't wanna, like, condemn it, but I just think it's and, like, it has the potential to be kinda cool because it's, like, if you're really into the series and you're into playing both games, like, I feel like that could be kind of neat, but also it's just strange. Like, it was just
Hmm.
strange, so,
Yeah,
um
wow.
but yeah, overall, like, I don't think I'm gonna be playing any more of it because it's not my preference, but I do genuinely think if I was gonna sit down with a mobile game, like, this one would be in consideration, um, but I will close off on it with reading some of the reviews, which
Oh,
were
good.
hilarious. They were mostly quite positive, but there were a couple people, and I just couldn't help but smile, and this person's written, "Doesn't give me the feeling I feel when I play Uncharted.
Yeah,
I'm
and
glad this
that's like hits
doesn't."
you in the to the bone.
Well, it's like, "I'm glad this doesn't have ads, but overall a 2 star." And then another person said, "This I really like this, but to be honest, I think I like Uncharted 3 more."
Oh, really? To be
And it's
honest?
like
Mm.
it just cracked me up. It's like, were you expecting it to be, like, the same as a full, like, release big title, like the main series?
Yeah, you gotta
Like,
change your expectations there a little bit.
yeah,
Is that a hot take?
it's kinda cracked me up. It's like, "Oh, really? Like, did you think it would be like Uncharted 4, the proper sequel?" So it's just kinda cute. Like, some of the reviews are just they got a smile out of me.
Love it, love it. Well, I'll tell you about Sackboy's Big Adventure. Or no, sorry, Run Sackboy Run. Sackboy's Big Adventure is the PS5 game, and I'd really like to play that. And I'm heard
Right.
it's a really
I
good.
wish
So
you were gonna tell me about that, but
I
instead, in the meantime.
maybe one day, but for now, I've been playing Run Sackboy Run, which is
Right.
an endless runner game. Very similar. I don't know if you've ever played Jetpack Joyride before.
Yes, I have. So I'm a little more, I'm familiar with that kind of style of game more so than I
Right.
think what
Okay.
I'd played.
Yeah, so this is basically a carbon copy of Jetpack Joyride, which is one of those, like when iPhones first came out, like that was one of the games where I really got into that because it's just kind of
Mhm.
what you did. You got into these games and whatnot. And Jetpack Joyride was a lot of fun for what it was, I think. Like it was very similar to like those Flash games you'd play back in the day on like shockwave.com.
Yeah,
And
and definitely, I used to play we used to play a lot of
oh,
those.
tons, tons. And this game is basically a carbon copy of that. You're running from left to right, trying to pick up little coins and find little collectibles and whatnot, and not get caught by whatever's chasing you. Which in this game is kind of a mechanical, crafty sort of dragon. It actually looks pretty cool. And this Little Big Planet, I think, has a really cool aesthetic in terms of like its crafty kind of look. It's similar to like a Paper Mario style. Like the world is like all crafts made of
Mhm.
different shapes, different household
Yeah. It's
crafting
funny that
stuff.
it's funny that it's such a, like, notable PlayStation game because I would say, like, Nintendo's got the monopoly on, like, Kirby's made of yarn and, like, Yoshi's made of wool and, like,
Yeah,
Paper
right.
Mario. It's like, well, we got Sackboy.
Yeah, Sackboy, and he does a good job to hang around with
He
those guys.
does. He does. Those games are really charming, I think.
Yeah, so anyway, this game, you're running along, doing your thing. You've got different score multipliers you're trying to get up. It's very much a high score game kind of deal. And it's
Mhm.
interesting that you bring up that your Uncharted game has store integrations with the Uncharted 4 multiplayer, because this game also has integrations with Little Big Planet, in that you can collect little stickers along the way, and I guess they add up to being different costumes and different I guess the ways you can dress Sackboy up to look like different
Mhm.
characters or whatnot. And as you collect these stickers, I guess they unlock costumes for the Little Big Planet 3, which is
Okay.
it's not a multiplayer game, so I guess that would work a bit differently because, well, I mean,
Mhm.
never mind. I guess there is multiplayer, but not like competitive, like I would
Right.
imagine.
It's yeah, it's more like co-op or like play other people's levels online and stuff.
Yeah, right. So there's that in this game as well, which is kind of cool. Like I guess it gives you a reason, if you're a big Little Big Planet fan, when you're away from your console, to go and try and collect different outfits for later on your console. So that's
Mhm.
kind of neat. And so the way this game works too, you're kind of collecting things as you go, and there's different items you can pick up along the way. So as you're running along, you can find a magnet, and the magnet will kind of draw in the little coins you're trying to collect from further distances, so you can kind of
Mhm.
increase your score that way. And the tracks are really designed like they're not just kind of you're running along the ground and jumping pits and whatnot. Like they're really, in Sonic maybe is a good comparison, where you can kind of
Mhm.
have like there's multi-tiered kind of ways. So there's like the ground floor, and then you can kind of get up
Mhm.
on some platforms that are higher up, and usually you'll
Yeah,
have maybe
there's a
more of a,
rail to go across.
yeah, there's just some more incentives to try and take maybe a more difficult path. So that's been
Mhm.
kind of fun to try and get past that. I've played probably a little bit more of this than I thought I was going to, just because I've been
Mhm.
at work a little bit, and killing some time, like like we all do. And so this has kind of just been available on
I
my
hope
phone.
your
And
boss isn't watching.
luckily I've
Oh, no,
been
I've never I was on my break, of course.
yeah. On my break, I'm not playing Little Big Planet. Uh so there's all that kind of thing. There's a lot of challenges too, which I like. I think that's part of the reason why maybe I've played a little bit more. It's like challenges like, oh, get to a certain distance on your next run, or see if you can collect a certain amount of coins on your next run. Like just little incentives to try. Oh,
Right.
maybe I will just try that one more time. Like I was pretty
Little
close.
Yeah, little breadcrumbs to entice you, that the hallmark of a good addictive mobile game.
That's right. That's right. So I wouldn't say I've been addicted by any sense of the word, but I mean, like you, I'm probably not going to play, too much more. But if I'm
Mhm.
waiting for, like, at a line somewhere, because now we're all lined up and socially distanced when we go to whatever store and whatnot, you never know. Like if it's a long one at customer service or something, maybe I'll pull out Sackboy's running game here. But it was fine. I think that I pretty much have the same sentiment as you seem to with your game, in terms of like, hey, it's not bad, and if I was going to get into something on mobile, it's probably one that would draw me in, probably just because it is a PlayStation kind of game. It's a character I'm familiar with. It's this kind of world. But am I gonna play anymore and really get into it? No, I don't think so. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of Sackboy. Unfortunately, I did not look up any great reviews like you did, so we'll have to maybe
Oh,
skip that for my game. But I'm sure people had some funny things to say about it too.
I'm
um
sure. Well, well, that's
yeah,
great. I'm glad that this yeah, I'm glad we checked them out. It was kind of a cute little experiment.
it was, yeah. And
Um
aside from that, I've not really been playing a whole lot. Like, I mean, we've both been playing Disco Elysium, but we're not going to talk
Mhm.
about that on the show at all until we're finished. And then, other than that, I've just been kind of like back in my Slay the Spire rabbit hole, which is still an addiction. I've got Monster Hunter going still. Getting up to the high rank armors and more challenging fights. The fights really get a lot more difficult when you hit the high rank kind of monsters, and
Mhm.
it becomes a little bit more strategic, especially when you're playing multiplayer. And I actually dove back into Apex as well, which was a lot of fun. There's a new season coming up with a new character that looks like uh, pretty game changing. She can like fly your whole squad around, and you can
Oh,
basically
wow.
surprise people by flying in from the sky and kill them from behind. So that's pretty interesting. So I'm excited for that to come out. But I don't have a whole lot of updates of other games I've been playing, but that's okay, because I feel like you're gonna have a lot to say about yours. So why don't
I've
you
I've
go
been
ahead?
I've been dreaming about this moment. Um, I don't know if I spoke about it last episode or alluded to it, but I have finished my full completion, I guess not like platinum full completion, but I finished my first proper run of Sekiro. And, I didn't talk about it last show because we just had a lot going on, and I wanted to kind of ruminate on it a little bit.
Well, let me be
I'm
the first just to say congratulations on
Thank
your
you.
ordeal.
Um, I'm so sad I've beaten it. I feel like there's a hole in my heart that can never be filled by anything else. And I'm just lost. Like I just don't know what to do with my life anymore. But I'm here to take this opportunity to tell you about my favorite game, Sekiro. So I mentioned I think on our list when we made our top 10, because I was in the middle of playing the game at that time, and I said that if the second half is as good as the first half, it's going to be the best game I've ever played.
I do
And
remember that. Yeah.
and the second half absolutely delivered. Um, so I mean, I'm not going to get into like what Sekiro is. I think everybody knows
Yeah.
kind of what the game is by now. It's it won Game of the Year. It's been very much in news, and I think it's that cool samurai game. You've seen it. But my sentiment about it is not only do I think the game is near perfect, I think it was tailored specifically to what I like in a game. So I think this game it's really unique. I've never played anything that feels quite like it, even though it definitely is a From Software game, and I'll get into that later. And I think it's executed perfectly. But I will caveat at the beginning to anyone who's not sure about the game or kind of on the fence. I think it asks the player to play on its terms, and it's not going to appeal to everyone. And I think that I'm surprised almost that it was Game of the Year, and not because it didn't deserve it. I think it is such a quality experience, but I just think that it's not as accessible as a lot of other games, and not because it's too difficult, but just because like it really is like there's one way to succeed, there's one way to the game wants you to play. And I think a lot of people kind of struggled with that because one of the big things that people like about other FromSoft games is they're very flexible. There's a lot of like, you can be a really like tanky build with like
Hmm.
a sword and
Hmm.
shield, or you can be like the fast dex kind of build, or you can do magic or pyromancy or like kind of a combination. Like there's a lot of like people really get into the idea of like build paths and trying out like different play styles.
Yeah. More variety.
Yeah, like more variety, and Sekiro has that to a degree because you unlock different abilities, and there's different skill trees that you spend points into as you play, and you get the different shinobi tools that all do various things in combat and outside of combat sometimes. And so like there is some variety in terms of like how you spend your points and build your character and like which tools you spec into. But at the end of the day, like you are a Sekiro, you're the shinobi warrior, like you can't get around like you're playing that character. And for me personally, this is exactly the character that I would build. And it clicked with me so much. And so I think maybe I'll get into the combat now. And I'm gonna compare it to other FromSoft games because it was weird coming into it for me, and it took actually a little while to get used to it. And at first, I was almost like, back in my very naive moments, I was kind of unsure like how I felt about it at first. It took a little while for it to really like sink in
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
the other games and like specifically like Bloodborne, which was my previous like standard, um, they're very much about like dodging and waiting for openings and going in and taking those couple hits when you can, and then getting out and like kind of like in and out of combat. And Sekiro is kind of the opposite. Like there are still some ways to dodge. You do have a dodge that has frames, and you do have a jump now, which is really nice. And you still have that kind of like combat philosophy of like learning the enemies like move patterns, especially if it's a boss, and kind of knowing like, okay, this move I have to jump over, it's a sweep, and like this move I have to like counter in this way. And so like there is a bit of that, but it's much more about timing your parries and getting into the flow of combat. Like I very much believe that this game is secretly a rhythm game.
I agree with that actually. From the little
Yeah.
that I played, you do really feel like the fights have a cadence to them when you're in them.
Mhm. You do, and I think, like, you need to just kind of, like, instinctively start to learn that and feel when it's your turn in the flow, and then when your turn is over and then now you've gotta stop attacking and go back on the block defensive, and it's it feels like such a beautiful and natural rhythm once you get into it, but it is hard. It's a big ceiling to get to that point. But it's so worth it when you do, and it's the trading momentum back and forth of the parrying because in this game, like, and it's another thing to kinda get used to, and it's funny, I had a friend who played, and he's like, "Well, I just do no damage, like, I feel so weak." Because when you actually hit an enemy, you do very little damage. You got a weak little
Right.
baby sword, like, it hardly hurts them. But the idea of the combat is that you're not vying for damage, you're vying for posture. So, whenever you attack in this game, and this is, maybe kinda more a little specific if someone hasn't, it's not easy to grasp necessarily just looking at it, but when you attack in this game, you are gonna be dealing more posture damage, so if you hit someone and they don't block it perfectly, they have a posture bar that fills up, and you have the same thing, it's the same rules for you. So if you get hit on not a good block, your posture bar will fill up. But if you parry, then instead of your posture bar going up, it actually hurts the opponent's posture if you parry them at the perfect time. So the strongest thing you can do in combat is to actually parry and attack at the right time, and it fills up that bar. The only thing that doing actual health damage is really useful for is the more damage that the enemy's taken, the quicker their posture bar will fill up. And once
Right.
it fills up, you get, which is like the most beautiful cinematic thing in the game, is you get these like death blows. And so it'll like zoom in, the music will play, like it gets so intense, and you get the prompt of like kill them. And he'll usually do it in like a really cool, like samurai kind of way, like he'll stab them, or sometimes he'll like spin around them and stab them, and like all the bosses have like cool, unique looking animations, like kind of like not as gruesome as God of War, but the same kind of thing where it's kind of really like over the top, like this is how you get them.
Mhm.
And even after like 50 hours of gameplay, it still felt so cool every time I did it. And even on like the most basic grunt enemy, you get it and you're like, yes.
I agree. They feel good. Like when even just pulling them off against the basic enemies. Like, and
Mhm.
I probably played the first quarter of the game, maybe between quarter and a third, whatever. But some of those basic enemies, even still, when you pull off those moves and their blood kind of starts like flying out,
Mhm.
it feels so tangible in a way
Yeah.
where it makes you feel like you've succeeded in doing something really cool, even if it's just like, hey, this guy was one of the first enemies in the game. Like it really does have that impact.
Yes, like, some of my, like, favorite enemies are, like, like, a couple enemies specifically that, don't give you tons of time to get on the offensive yourself, but you can quickly realize that their posture bar fills up really quickly. So there's a couple enemies in the game that, and actually, like, there's a mini boss who's kind of like or two mini bosses actually that are sort of like larger versions of that enemy, and I didn't attack them a single time and beat them just off of blocking because
Wow.
it's it was like a really strong strategy on them, and it feels so good to get that after like a really cool block, because it's like ding parry and then you get them, and it's like
Like,
it's
got you, motherfucker,
amazing.
got you.
Yeah, and it's so like, you just feel like you're like, "Yes!" Like, you wanna, like, cheer and stand up and, like, oh my god. There's been times in this game where, like, I get so into it and, like, especially on, like, the really long, difficult bosses because, like, there's some bosses that, like, oh my god, it feels like you must fight them for hours. You don't, like, each goes, like, maybe only a couple minutes, but, like, there's some they have quite a few, like, phases there. They get, like, quite long. And, like, my heart just, like, gets pounding when I play this game, like, my hands were, like when I beat the final boss, my hands were shaking, and, like, I just get so, like, wrapped up in the moment. So, and specifically the final boss, I will say, like, I don't wanna spoil it too much because I strongly believe that this is a game that's best, to just go in and experience, but the final boss in this game was so surprising to me, partially because it does have, like, a twist in it, but also, like, it was just so cool, and it was a culmination of everything that you've learned. Like, the final boss, not only, like, was it really good story-wise, but it also he had mechanics from basically every boss or, like, type of enemy in the game, and I really felt like I had to use everything I'd learned up until that point.
It's like a big final test, which I think is a
Yeah,
good way to do that. Like, you know, because it proves that you've gained all these skills and you can use them. You've learned to execute them, and now you're a master of the game's mechanics.
yeah, exactly. Like, there's a couple other cool bosses. There's a notable one I really like, that you and it's cool, this game you get to fight some bosses twice, but it never feels like a lazy, like, "Oh, they just reused the boss," like in some other FromSoft games. But it really feels like it's just a progression of the fight, and so it's cool, like, so there's one that's my favorite, and I won't spoil who he is, but he, like, uses a lot of the shinobi tools that you have, and I always think that's cool when they come up with a similar kind of, like, set of skills that you have.
Yeah.
Um, so he's really cool, and then the final boss, yeah, just uses, like, everything, like, he pulls out, like, different weapons that other bosses have used, and so he's got, like, kind of their sort of moves, and then he's got moves from other types of areas in the game, and so it's just, like, a really felt like a really beautiful culmination, like, they put a lot of thought into it. So I was super impressed, like, the final boss was really kind of the most epic part of the game, and I think not a lot of games pull that off, and I wasn't even really expecting it to be, but, um, it was yeah, it was very, very neat experience. Um, yeah, and then I guess just quickly too, I'll kind of go over just the world I think is beautiful. The like visually the game is gorgeous, but it has some really interesting environments, some varied places that you go to. Uh, and what was really neat too is there's certain areas that change as you progress.
Hmm.
So, maybe kind of like mild spoiler here, but the story kind of like centers around like a rebellion and a war coming to Ashina where it's set, and so the war actually kind of, like, progresses as you play, and there's a couple points in the game where, you'll come back to an earlier area that wasn't under siege, and now it is, so now there's, like, kind of 2 factions fighting, and then you go in and you can sort of, like, fight them at the same time or, like, kind of just, like, watch and see what they do, and so it feels really dynamic, and it really feels like a very genuine world that's, like, happening with or without you.
You're just a participant within a larger kind of narrative that's going on, regardless of your action, right? Which I
Yeah,
think a lot of games is like they kind of stand around and wait for you to make all the things happen as the player character.
yeah, exactly, and I think that's something that FromSoft always does really well and really is noticeable here in Sekiro, like, there's a lot of times where you have, like, a side quest kind of idea with a character, and oftentimes in another game, like, they'll, like, "Please do this for me," and then if you either do it or you don't, but if you don't, they just stand there waiting for you for literally the rest of their life, and it's like, it's how many years has it been, lady? Like, maybe you could have delivered that letter yourself.
Yeah, maybe your onions could just you could just go pick your onions, you know?
Yeah, exactly, like, okay, the rats you wanted me to go kill, maybe they've already died of old age at this point, we've missed our window here. But in Sekiro, like or like a FromSoft game and specifically Sekiro, it's like, well, you can go do that for them or you cannot do it, but not doing it is, like, usually just, like, a different outcome because they will continue on without you, and, something will happen to them if they don't get what you were supposed to help them with. And then oftentimes there's like a couple different ways to choose how you progress, which is kind of neat. And I think this game had really good side characters. It's a little bit more focused, which is interesting. Like it still has the really good environmental storytelling, and it still has the items descriptions that you read, and you kind of piece together a lot of the lore for yourself. But it was a little bit more upfront with information. There's a few more characters that are really like relevant to the main plot, and I think part of that just ties into the fact that like you're not an outsider coming into this game. You're not a character that's like from a different land or just, like here and discovering the world for the first time. You're specifically Sekiro, like you're integral to the plot, like you have relationships already with these characters because like you're not just a player made character, you are someone in the story and in the game,
Hmm.
which like was kind of a neat alternative approach.
Well, and
And
also
I
you got to think like this is the first time too. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the player characters also has like dialogue and stuff too, because the other
yes.
FromSoft games you're always a silent protagonist.
Yes, exactly, and the voice acting is absolutely wonderful as well, by the way. I, played it in Japanese just because
Hell yeah.
I tend to prefer just doing whatever, like, the native languages for games, and I really like the voice acting, but the English is fine too. And, like, there were just some, like, moments where I was like, "Ooh," like, I got chills, like, it's really well written, and it's really well done, and your relationship, because 'cause you're kind of like the shinobi and you're tied to this younger boy, and the relationship that the 2 characters have is really quite sweet because, as a shinobi, you're, like, kind of a bit more, like, stoic and serious, and he's quite a pragmatic little kid, but you have a couple moments throughout that are quite sweet, like, there's one time where, I won't spoil the context, but you give him some rice, and he makes it into, like, a little, like, rice ball treat, and he gives you the treat. And he's like, "Oh, I wanna share this with you." And so if you actually eat it in front of him, then, like, there's a couple dialogue lines, and he asks you, like, "Oh, what did you think of it?" And you're like, "Oh, it was very good, my lord." And, like, it was, like, some cute little moments that, I didn't necessarily expect to get in this kind of a game. Um, and so I can't recommend it more. Like, I love this game. I'm gonna go back and play it because there's a few different endings, and some of them have like a couple bosses you can only experience if you do a certain ending. So
Oh,
there's a
cool.
little bit of content left for me to play, and they've also added in post launch. In some updates, like a boss rush mode, where you can go back and fight different bosses, and you can do it on different like difficulty settings and whatnot. So I want to go back and do all of that.
Wait, there's
Then,
difficulty settings?
well, there's technically a difficulty setting within the game, but it is to make it harder, not easier.
Gotcha.
so,
Okay.
so yeah, I obviously just played it regular at the time, but I kind of want to play around with that and just see sort of what changes out of curiosity. And then I also want to like do the quote unquote bad ending and fight the couple extra bosses. So my days of Sekiro are not done, but I do feel like I've completed it, and it's got a special place in my heart, and I'm looking forward to see what kind of game can come along that will topple it. Because right now it's
Ooh.
king.
It's gonna be hard to topple, like if you like me with Persona 5, like I don't I couldn't it's hard for me to envision a game that would top it. So I'm getting the same feeling for you that's like very much like this.
Exactly, and it's the kind of thing where, like I said before, like, I think the game is amazing and the attention to detail they put in and, like, some of the environmental storytelling, like, if it's not your thing, I think it's at least something that should be talked about in the community and should be looked at because it's just so attention to detail is so big. Like, even it comes down to, like, the enemy placement and certain enemies being in certain areas, like, they're there for a reason, they tell a story, and, like, you can't pick up on all the little things. There's tons of little details I missed, and I'm in the phase now where it's got a really wonderful community around it, and I'm watching all the videos of smarter people who've played it and notice little details that tell you little bits of lore, or this character's here because of this, and if you notice this detail, or like that you read this item, then it actually like you learn something new. And there's just so many little like breadcrumbs to follow, and so many little things to learn that like you just can't possibly notice. But like it's almost like you could study this game.
Oh, I
And
bet
I
you
think,
people will.
yeah, and I think like there isn't a single part of it that I ever feel that they've just thrown in because 'cause they're like, "Oh, this is cool," or like, "Oh, we need another fight," or like, "We need some enemies in this area. Let's just, chuck these guys in." And not to say that other developers are careless, but there's just that extra level of attention to detail and thought put into
Yeah, yeah.
how these kind of worlds and games are designed. And, like, I have hours of videos ahead of me on top of the hours I've spent already, like, reading up on these small little details, and that's not gonna be for everyone, right? Not everyone wants to go into it quite so granularly, but I just think, like, you can really tell that they had a vision, it was a passionate project, and they just put their heart and soul into this kind of game. Haha, soul. And I want that to be, celebrated, and I want more games to really, like, not focus on, just being popular, just making money. And I think, like, there's that work of art aspect that really is prominent to me in these kind of games, and it's what makes me feel really passionate about gaming. But with that being said, there is that caveat that it's not gonna be for everyone. If it's not for you, like, that's totally fine. I understand it's kind of like a niche sort of experience, but it's just exactly the weird all the check boxes that I like. It's just it was perfect. I feel like they made it for me. So, I'd like to personally thank FromSoft for being my biggest fan because I'm your biggest fan.
Oh man, my heart feels warm right now. I'm so happy that you
Right? I
enjoyed the game
know.
so much. And
Yes.
I think
Alright,
you're
and
you're 100% right though, like in terms of the way that they craft these worlds. And I think that there needs to be more studios that go to the level of depth that they clearly do. Like we were just talking off mic as well about the example of that character with the bleeding eyes, like kind of near the start of the game, and how things happen with that later. And just that's a level of detail where it's like, hey, they're showing you this, you might not catch it. If you do, it's just like another level of how they obviously put their care and their someone thought of these little details that come back later in the game, which is like this level of consistency
Mhm.
and just world building that I think is a very special thing, and it really shows off what games can be and kind of how they can be written to really be immersive and create a like a real tangible world. And as someone
Mhm.
who's like decently familiar with FromSoft through you and a couple other friends that are really into it, and watching some
Mhm.
videos and completing Bloodborne and playing a bit of this here and there, like I really can see the just what you're talking about in terms of like the care that they put in, and the art form that these
Mhm.
games almost are. And so I think that's really respectable, and like you said too, like just caring about the art and the world first, and as opposed to like the marketing or the trying
Mhm.
to create a franchise that's popular and everyone will like it so they can sell a bunch of copies. Like that's really not what this is. And hey, it turned out pretty well
Mhm.
because they won game of the year. So I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly, and there's a lot of studios that are doing it too, like, I'll buy every FromSoft game that they ever make because I love their studio, but it goes as well for someone like, I'd say, Supergiant with, like,
mhm,
Hades and Pyre and, like, all those, like, weird games they make, and it's very much a similar kinda thing, and there's a lot of, like, indie studios that are really good too, like, Undertale came out and it blew up the internet, and it was just like, well, like,
mhm.
this guy really had, like, such a beautiful vision for a game, and he made it, and so I just like, those are kind of games where, like, I love gaming and I play a lot of games, and I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with the game that's just like, I sat down and had a good time. Like, it relaxed me, it took some stress off of my life. It was,
Well,
I had
sometimes
fun,
that's
I
what you
played with
want.
a friend. Sometimes that's what you want, but I think, like, there are these studios that kinda go a little bit, like, above and beyond, and it's really, like, hones in the kind of, like, this is such an artistic medium, and it's such a cool way that we can experience art, not just as, like, a passive person, like, watching a movie or reading a book, which obviously I love doing too, but there's that extra level of, like, intimacy, like, I played the game, I was involved in it, like, I beat it, and I think, like, it's such a cool thing that gaming exclusively has that no other art form can kind of, like, be on the same level with.
Yeah, yeah. I have one question for you,
Yeah.
to satisfy my curiosity. Are you going to get the platinum in the game? Are you planning to do like is that literally everything you got to do, or is it kind of just full of stuff that you don't consider
Um,
like necessary?
I think it'll depend, like, I actually did think about it, and it's gonna depend. I actually haven't really, like, taken a big look at the trophy list, so I'm gonna look at it. I If it's just, like, get all the endings, then maybe. What would put me off is if it's, like, buy all the upgrades and, like, finish all the skill
Mm,
trees and, like, it's like, maybe I could eventually, I could do it just by having played the game, but I will say that is actually one area of the game I didn't really, engage with very much is the actual, like, shinobi tools. I think they're super cool, and every time I got one, I was very excited and, like, wanted to try it out and see what it did, but, like, I just liked the base combat so much that I didn't invest in any of that stuff because, like, I just liked playing how the base combat felt.
that's so.
So, like, I had all these tools, I was like, I don't wanna use that, I just wanna fight with my sword."
Oh man, those tools were some of the coolest part of the game to me. Like just seeing what you
Yeah,
could attach to your hand and how it would look, and like
yeah,
the animation when he pulls them out. Like those are some of the
yeah.
coolest little things.
I agree, and so I'd, like, like, get excited and use it twice when I got it, but, like, I don't know, I was just so, like, in the zone doing the combat that I'd forget to use them most of the time, and there were a couple of times I did use them because some of them, they're very helpful with certain enemies. Um, so I think that's, like, a super cool part of the game, but just not something that I really did, so, like, I didn't spend a lot of money upgrading them. And so if the platinum is like upgrade everything and like buy every single thing in the game, it's like, nah, I don't
Yeah.
know. Like I'm gonna play it a couple more times for the endings. So if I like make enough progress just by playing, because it's like, well, I've got extra points to spend, or like I've got all this money now, and like what am I gonna buy with it? And if I get close, then maybe I
Yeah.
will. But it's gonna depend on the trophy list. I think like
That's
if
fair.
it seems like if it's a fun list or if it's a list you can complete kind of just while playing the game, then I'm happy to put in however many hours it takes. But I'm not a huge trophy hunter, so it seems like something that's tedious, then, I might be out, but
Oh yeah. Yeah.
we'll see, we'll
Just
see.
curious.
I've made some claims in the past about, like, I'm still technically platinuming Bloodborne and Hades right now, even though it's been a while, so
It's been a
I don't
while.
wanna make any big claims and,
Yeah, especially not on the show when you're like etched in history, like you
that's
got to
right.
back these claims up.
That's right, this cannot be erased, so we'll see, we'll see.
Cool.
Maybe that'll be my fun fact at the start of one episode, but,
Cool. Okay. Well,
not for
we will
today.
look forward to that, Kate. But in the meantime, why don't we take a quick break, and then we'll come back and talk about the Ratchet and Clank state of play. So don't go anywhere, anyone. We'll be right back. Hey everyone, welcome back to the show for the second part of our episode today, which of course, as usual, is the news section. So we got 3 stories today to talk about. The first of which is just a quick little update on something we covered on the show before, which is that there's been a post on the PlayStation blog, I think from Jim Ryan, right, where saying that the PS3 Vita stores are continuing operation. Just wanted to throw this in there really quick because 1 or 2 episodes ago we had the news come out that they were closing down the digital storefronts on the PlayStation 3 and the Vita, and also the PSP, which I was kind of surprised was still open. Uh, but anyway, they've reversed that decision, I think largely because people just really were complaining about it, like the storefronts getting shut down. And I mean, I guess rightfully so in a lot of ways, especially since like Xbox is the biggest competitor, is doing so much in terms of like keeping old games alive and available. So it's good to see this news be turned around. And personally, I'm happy that my wallet can have a bit of a break and I don't have to go and drop a couple $100 on all the games I want to get before they're gone. So good
It's a
news.
good thing you didn't. I bet there's a few people that did, and they're kicking themselves now, like, "Oh, man, like,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
didn't have
so
to buy
true,
all these
so
games."
true. But just wanted to shout that out. I don't know if you have anything to add, Kate, or if we can move
No,
along.
I just think that's nice, like, I was actually listening, to another podcast recently who had mentioned it and or might not mentioned that it was back up, but just had been talking about, it going down and, they were actually, like, kind of a bit disappointed because they were still using it, and I was like, "Oh, okay," like, this affects certain people, and so, like, for them and for people who are passionate about it, that's awesome.
And I love my Vita. I'm glad it's not going anywhere for the time
Mhm.
being. But anyway, Kate, let's move along to some bigger news. We have the PlayStation Plus monthly games for May 2021. So of course, as usual, for those joining us for the first time, Kate and I usually both pick 1 game from the PlayStation Plus offerings every month, and we review it, talk about it on the show for the next episode. So for May 2021, our choices are as follows. We have Battlefield 5, Stranded Deep, and a PlayStation 5 exclusive offering for us is Wreckfest with the tagline "Drive hard and die last." Uh, we've had, like we always talk about, we've had some really good offerings the last few months on the show. Even last month, I think we were a little bit lukewarm, and we ended up both liking our games a little bit more than maybe we thought, right? And so hopefully
Mhm.
this happens again. I don't think either of us are particularly jazzed and really jumping out of our seat to play any of these, but am I wrong here, or how are you feeling?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think like these are some obviously some like Battlefield's a really big name and I don't think it's necessarily a question of quality of these games. I don't think these are really what we would normally pick to play. But sometimes that's nice, just inviting a little bit of variety into our lives. Do you have one that particular speaks to you that you would like to take?
Well, I mean, I went through, kind of looked these around. I don't think either of us are going to be picking Battlefield 5, so I think we can maybe cross that off.
Scratch
Stranded
that
Deep, the other two kind of have a bit of interest to me. Stranded Deep is Actually, I'd never heard of that game before. Before I kind of watched the trailer and did a little bit of looking around just for this, but I mean
Hmm.
that looks kind of interesting. I think personally I might go for Wreckfest just because it is the PS5 game, so it's gonna be hopefully made with some DualSense integration or anything like any kind of features like that. So I would maybe pick Wreckfest, but I'm not
Uh-oh.
I'm not too sold on it.
Not?
Uh,
Okay, 'cause I Wreckfest is definitely the one that I've got my eye on, just for the same reason. Well, I mean, first of all, the tagline really inspires me, "Drive hard, die last," like, that's a
yeah.
philosophy I wanna live my life by.
Well, exactly. And if you read the description here on the PS blog, the way it's described is the Wreckfest: burn rubber, break rules, and shred metal in this full contact racer. Like, fuck yeah, burn rubber, like
Oh, hell yeah.
shred
Well,
metal. Call it.
I'm a pretty hardcore kind of person, and, as I say, standing literally in my pajamas recording this,
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, the integration of the PS5 might be kinda neat. Stranded Deep seems kinda neat, but it's one of those, like, survival-y games, which, like, really are not my kind of style, so I'm gonna say I will fight you for Wreckfest if
You'll
you want to accept the challenge or if you'll just nicely concede it and, go strand yourself somewhere
Oh man.
deep.
Okay, well, I mean, you know what? I'm happy to play Stranded Deep, to be honest with you.
Okay.
They
Yeah.
both were kind of appealing. This game looks like it might have some kind of like funny stories that might come out of
Mhm.
figuring out how to survive, and maybe I'll get eaten by a shark or some weird stuff. So I'm
Okay.
I'm happy, and it also is like you're braving the treacherous elements and the dangers of the Pacific,
Okay.
and we live near the Pacific Ocean, so maybe I'll
Right.
find some kind of interesting facts about that or something. So if you really want Wreckfest, I'm surprised you're interested in that, to be honest. But maybe by looking at the other two games, maybe I can see why that
Yeah.
would be your choice.
And to be fair, I don't think, I'm mostly just having a bit of a laugh. I don't really
Yeah.
think that Breakfast is gonna be my game, but I just think that I will, kinda maybe come at it with the right perspective, as being kind of neutral and just seeing, like, the PS5 integration is interesting. I feel like I'd rather do that than be like, "Yeah, I didn't like Stranded Deep or Battlefield, but, like, it's not my kinda game, so I
Mhm,
don't wanna,
mhm.
like, shit on it." But,
Yeah.
like, yeah, they're
True.
just not my style. So Wreckfest is and I don't ever play racing games. There's kind of that little, like, "Okay, card game, what is this all about?" Maybe it's my new passion, we'll see.
Yeah, no, yeah, I think that's cool too, and that's like one of my favorite parts of doing this PS Plus thing every month is just like, hey, but I play some stuff that I would never usually check out, and it just kind of expands your horizon and like exposes you to different games. Like I never would have played Need for Speed back that few months ago, and like not that I had an amazing time with it, but it's just like something to change what I would usually play and get a different kind of perspective, and
Yeah,
I
exactly.
like that.
And yeah, it's good, and even just to, have a little bit more context when you're looking at other games, it's helpful, and then every now and again, we do find something that's like, "Oh, like, I might play," like, when I played Greedfall, for example, I wasn't expecting much, and then I ended up really enjoying it and thinking like, "Oh, this might be a game that, like, I eventually would play and I would never have known otherwise." So, I like my curiosity sometimes likes to be satiated with trying new things, so Wreckfest, we'll see. I'm gonna drive hard, die last, and
And shred some metal.
and shed some yeah, here we go.
Oh man. Okay, well that's great. We'll let you guys know what we think of those games on our next episode, which of course again is our 1 year anniversary. Very exciting. You'll play Wreckfest for the 1 year anniversary of Circles and
Aw,
Squares. It's
I
perfect.
I don't know how better to celebrate.
Well, we can celebrate Ratchet and Clank coming up here, Kate, with our last news story, which of course is that we had a state of play happened on April 29th, showed off some more gameplay of Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, as if I needed to be sold on this game anymore. I don't know what they could have shown that would have made me any more excited. I'm already like 10 out of 10 like hype for this, but so we started off. It was a 15-minute presentation, and it was kind of like a weirdly paced one in my opinion. Like they started off and they showed Subnautica. There was 3 games shown actually at the state of play. So the first one was Subnautica, and this is a sequel, I think, right to the
Yeah,
original.
yeah,
And
Subnautica Below Zero, and it's a sequel to I think the original was just called Subnautica.
yeah, so this is another survival game. I think the original one actually just took place underwater, and so this one kind of is interesting in the fact that you can get out and walk around on land also. But yeah, you're kind of doing some base building, doing some survival, gathering equipment, stuff like that, and it looks like it has a bit of a horror aspect to it as well, which I
It
didn't know.
There was, like, a jump scare that I was not prepared for, and, in the trailer, and it actually, like, it got me. So I don't know if it's like if it is intended to be like a little bit like unsettling or sinister, if it was just that jump scare gave me like a weird impression. But I did also get the kind of feel like a bit of unease watching this trailer.
Yeah, I mean, I guess horror kind of, or not horror, sorry, like survival kind of has some inherent kind of like scary mechanics, like you might die if you drown, or can't find what you're looking for in the environment. But yeah, this looks kind of interesting. I don't think I'll check it out, but it looks like for those that enjoyed Subnautica, or for those that have interest in this type of game, or maybe like Stranded Deep, like we were just talking about, like this might be for those people for sure.
Right. Maybe Stranded Deep is gonna be your entry point, and then you're actually gonna buy Subnautica instead of Ratchet and Clank.
Oh man, don't make that mistake, folks. Don't make that mistake. And that's not an indictment of Subnautica. But then, anyway, after the Subnautica showing there, we had what is probably one of the shortest introductions for a game I've ever seen. This, of course, is Among Us, coming to PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5 as well. I guess they didn't have to show a lot. People really are conscious and know what Among Us is at this point. But and they're also doing a Ratchet and Clank, what is it? A Ratchet and Clank skin for Among Us as well. So that's
Mhm.
pretty cool. Cool little tie-in. Hopefully, people will be introduced to Ratchet and through Among Us, and then get to experience what is Rift Apart. So let's talk about Rift Apart, Kate. Could that
Mhm.
trailer have been any cooler? I don't know what they could have shown that would have made it
I
any
don't
better. Like those graphics.
I don't even wanna call it a trailer because that to me was like, that was game footage. Like, I that to me was not like a pre-rendered trailer,
True.
like,
Okay.
that was
Wrong word.
and
Wrong word.
so, like, I wanna stress that not like, it looked amazing. It looked like, I don't know if you've ever seen the, like, Riot does, like, cinematics for League of Legends. I don't know if you've ever
No,
watched
I've
one,
not. I've not.
but, like, it's in the same kind of vein as, like, Blizzard does them for, like, Overwatch and, like, little Pixar, like, cinematic kind of things. It's in the same kind of, like, quality of that, and it reminded me of the League ones because 'cause they've got, some characters who, like, kind of look a little bit like Ratchet, and so, like, I was watching, I was like, "This looks so much like one of those," and they're, like, high quality, like, almost like Pixar-esque kind of visuals, and I was like, "It looks like this, but it's the actual, like, in-game footage." Like, the game is gorgeous, and not only is it gorgeous, like, the background assets stood out to me so much because, like, oftentimes you're playing a game and you're like, "This looks really great," but, like, if you actually stop and focus on, like, what the background looks like, it's like, okay, it's a little bit less resolution, like, like, everyone points out and you see, like, there was that, like, tree in Pokemon when it came out, for
Oh
example,
my
and someone
god. Yeah.
had a screenshot of, like, "Oh, this is, like, the ugliest looking, like, asset. They've got this tree." They just kinda, like, like, don't put all the resources into, like, all the background stuff because it's not what you're focusing on. But, like, I made a point after I saw how cool one of the environments looked to, like, look at the backgrounds of the game, not just, like, stuff in the forefront, and, like, the background is just as beautiful, like, it is absolutely, like, I don't know how they're running it, like, the PS5 must be a strong console because this game looks phenomenal.
Absolutely, yeah, and I mean, Insomniac has just been killing it recently too, and I think like that's another strong aspect of like Miles Morales and the Spider-Man games is just like New York feels so alive, and even standing on top of buildings, you can see so far into the distance, and yeah, it has that same kind of draw distance as in Ratchet, and I mean, you're speaking about the background. Well, like even what's going on in the foreground too, like when he's going through and breaking boxes or shooting the weapons, fighting the enemies, like the little particles that kind of break off and the little effects on the weapons or like going through the portals and the rifts, like all these little lightning effects, kind of like, man, it all just looks so impressive, and the amount of action that can be going on the screen at one time without any kind of lag or stuttering or loading or anything like that. It's just it seems like a technical marvel.
Yes, and specifically, I wanna, like, focus on those riffs as well, like, he's pulling there's, like, rifts you can come across, and you pull yourself through them, and they'll either, like, teleport you, like, just a short distance in the same area, or they'll take you to, like, a whole new area, like, totally different from where you were with totally different things going on, and in both of those transitions, it was, like, so smooth, like, there's not a load, there's not, like, a slowdown, it isn't hidden behind, like, animation that makes it, like, that looks nice for you, but, like, gives it a couple seconds to
Yeah,
load in new stuff, like, it was instant and smooth, and I was, like, blown away by just how, like, good those transitions were to the point where, like, they weren't even transitions, you were just there and in a different environment and, like, in the middle of the game still.
Yeah, and then, you know, one other thing too is who I forget who was presenting. I think it was one of the directors of the game. Forgive me for not remembering, but he was mentioning kind of during the narration that when you go through these rifts, it's not loading you into some, you know, tiny arena to fight a bunch of enemies. Like they specifically said, when you go through the rift and you get teleported to a different environment, that you're seriously just getting loaded into like that whole environment, like whatever whole area you're going into, instead of just some small room. Like it really is loading a whole new aspect of the game or a whole new place. So I think that's just such a cool effect. And you know, they also mentioned a lot of the weaponry, like the way it kind of feels on the DualSense feels. I guess they've introduced a lot of new weapons to the game, kind of alongside some returning selections from older games, and just the way they're all going to integrate with the DualSense and all have kind of a unique feel to them. And they look impressive too. So I'm sure, like, hearing what people are saying about Returnal and how the weapons feel on with the haptics and the DualSense on there, I'm sure it'll be, you know, up to the same standard with this as well. And those explosions, like the way they look, I'm sure like feeling them is going to be a very interesting experience. And especially with the triggers too, like they were saying how a half press on the trigger is kind of your primary fire, and then an alternate fire would be a full press after you kind of click that halfway point in with the trigger. So it's almost like a new control scheme as well in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I think that almost like, okay, like the visuals and like how good it looks is like the immediate takeaway, but thinking about it afterwards, like that to me is the coolest thing they showed off. It's so clever, like just yeah, to go into a little more detail, like you had like a gun they showed off, and it was like if you partially or you half press the trigger for the dual sense, you get, like, just like a regular fire, like, you know, a couple weapons, and if you full press it, it, like, unloads the whole clip or, like, uses all of your ammo to fire a bigger shot, and, like, using that hardware to integrate, like, an extra button or, like, to let you, like, do degrees of it, and it actually changes how the gun works, like, that's so clever, and I think, like, you know, it sounds kinda cool, but, like, it's hard to sort of imagine if you haven't actually had a chance to play with the controller, but I can really see, like, it's gonna be very clear, I think, to feel which one you're doing, and I think the controller's good enough that you can be intentional to choose which type of fire you're gonna want, and I think,
Yeah,
like, that's probably gonna be, like, such a cool, like, extra tactile experience,
I
and
totally agree. Yeah, because I mean, for those that have played with the DualSense, it really has a lot of like. It's not like you're kind of pushing it halfway and you're guessing like, oh, I guess this is the you know, primary shot, or maybe I pushed that too far. Whoops! Like it can really click into place in a way where it feels like you said, like an extra button. Like it's very
Mhm.
obvious, with the technology in there. So I'm excited to see obviously some of the later weapons that weren't shown off in the trailer and how they're going to integrate that and kind of what kind of variety they can introduce with that, because that's a really unique feature just specifically to the PS5, like that at this point at least probably couldn't be created with a different system.
No, like, you yeah, exactly, like, you couldn't play it with any other hardware, like and that is I guess it's like it's, like a luxury they have designing it as an exclusive game, and so, like, you know, maybe we won't see that in things that, you know, are also on PC or other consoles because it's not part of the hardware available, but, like,
Yeah.
I think it's so neat to see that they're really, like, utilizing the resources that they do have and having the chance to be so creative with it. So yeah, the game looks great. I'm assuming you are 100% decided your day one purchase?
Oh, I was day one purchase before I even saw gameplay of this for sure. Like Ratchet's one of my favorite PlayStation franchises ever. So just seeing what they've been able to do with it and bring it into the next gen, like I'm full systems ahead, like day one purchase, no question on this. I have to shout out as well. I don't know if you remember, but when I was playing those the PlayStation 3 Ratchet games a little while
Mhm,
back on the show, I mentioned one of my favorite weapons was the Zircon family that
mhm.
you know, shows up and fights for you. But in this game, it's been revealed that Ms. Zircon is actually the new weapons vendor, and you gotta get to hang out with her and buy upgrades. So I love that little throwback to a previous
Mhm.
weapon now like being a character. Seems pretty cool. And you know, the last thing I guess to talk about, unless you had anything else too, was they showed off kind of gameplay as both Ratchet and Rivet. We know her name now as a second playable character, and I really like what they've done in terms of, it seems like they share currency and inventory as well.
Mhm.
So it's not like if you have a bunch of really interesting and fun weapons with Ratchet, and then I'm assuming get to a different section of the story, and all of a sudden you're playing as Rivet. You don't, I guess, lose the weapons and the kind of the play
Mhm.
style you've built up with Ratchet and have to restart with something really basic. Like you seem to share your resources, which I think is a good decision.
I think that's smart. I think you kind of have 2 options, either, like, you make them feel quite different and they have different sort of play styles so that, like, it's more, distinct to play one or the other, or if they're gonna be similar, I do very much like the idea of sharing stuff, because then you never get to that point where, like, "Oh, fuck, I gotta play as, like, Ratchet, she's not as fun."
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's cool. I'm that's pretty much all I gotta say. I say watch the state of play. It's super impressive. Like I came into it, and Ratchet and Clank's a franchise I have a very high opinion of, but just never really got into. But I will say, like after watching this last one, I'm like, maybe like should I buy it? Like, oh shit, this game looks so good.
It
So
does. Yeah.
there's a potential in my future, because I know you're gonna buy it, and so I like the idea of, once you're done with it, maybe I'll borrow it and play through it. But there's a potential chance now, based on this trailer and what I'm playing at the time when it comes out. There might be an impulse Ratchet purchase in my future.
Ooh, I hope so. That would be fun. Anyway, I'm sure we'll be talking about this game a lot more on the show, whether you buy it or not. I know I'll be playing it, so and I'll have a lot to say on future episodes. So look forward to that. But I think for now that's going to close our news portion out for today's episode. So again, stick around, because after the break we have a fun discussion on video game sidekicks and of course listener mail questions. So please don't go anywhere. All right, everyone, welcome back to the third and final part of today's show, where we are going to discuss video game sidekicks. I think that sidekicks have been something that's kind of been around in games for a number of years, even like dating back to Mario. You play as Luigi as the second player, or like, any kind of multiplayer game, you got to have two characters. So, I mean, they've been around for a while, but really, like, what makes a good sidekick? Like, do they have to be a foil to the main character, or like add some kind of comedic value, or is it just as simple as being like the second player, being the Tails to the Sonic? What do you think makes a good sidekick, Kate?
So I was thinking about, I kind of nailed down like three sort of general ideas of what I think a good sidekick is, and I think first off, they help to foil the main character. I think that's a really good phrasing for it. I think, especially if it's a sidekick, like someone who kind of follows you throughout the entire game and the entire journey, I think they add a lot to developing who the main character is. They build the world that you're in. Um, and they kind of just they give a lot of context. Like my favorite sidekicks is like someone I can't picture the main character without, because
Mm-hmm.
they're just so integral. Their relationship is so integral to how you understand the main character, and I think the best kind of sidekick to someone, like the game doesn't work without them. So I think that's number one key. I think the second point, but kind of in a similar sort of vein, I think their dialogue and their relationship is going to play off in a meaningful way, and I think it can deliver is a good tool to deliver kind of like exposition to the player.
That's what I was gonna say. Is like, I mean, I was talking in Days Gone a little while ago about, is an example of this is like Deacon needs to talk to himself to almost tell the character what he's doing, or like why, like, oh, I got to search for my bike. But a
Mhm.
good sidekick in a game which has characters moving around together is kind of like an excuse for the main character to say something out loud and not seem like a weirdo.
Yeah, exactly. Like they can, talk to each other and kind of give the player the information that maybe you need to hear. But it comes off in a realistic way with them talking, and it's like I think just like a clever way to kind of like give that information, but also it's not just like pandering, like you need to know this, otherwise
Mhm.
you'll never get through. But like, okay, they would have that conversation. It feels like a part of the game instead of just like an aside to help you.
Yeah,
I
they can
think
really be like the main, like the player's eyes into the world almost too, because oftentimes I think the main character is someone who's knowledgeable or has lived in this world for so long, whereas the sometimes the sidekick is kind of less experienced in whatever you're doing, whether it's an adventure or a fight or whatever, and so they can kind of act as the players, you know they can ask the questions the players may have of the world, and then the main character can explain to them like, oh, this is, we do it this way because of X reason, or
Mhm.
it can take away some of that awkward pause menu type of reading tutorials, I
Yeah.
think.
So yeah, that's a good tool, and I think the last thing I came up with, and I like when they have some kind of relevant gameplay mechanic as well. Like, whether that's being a second player, if there's a multiplayer aspect, or if that's like they have a certain skill that the your player character doesn't have, and so it's not possible to solve the puzzles or like get through the level without them. And so I think like I like that kind of when they're not just integrated into the story, but also they're integrated into like how you actually interact and play the game.
Yeah, I think so too, and I think certain sidekicks are almost functionally like items in certain ways. Like if you want to talk, like we were just talking about Ratchet and Clank, for as good as Ratchet and Clank's relationship is, it's not like he's a big part of the story a lot of times, but Clank is really an item that allows Ratchet to have mobility that he wouldn't have otherwise. And even sidekicks, like I was thinking in terms of Pokemon, like is Pikachu a sidekick? Like he's a tool basically to get through fights. Like he's basically a move set, but at the same time, they're kind of sidekicks in a
Yeah,
weird way.
I agree, like, I got very much into the idea of, like, what is a sidekick? And sort of, like, there's a couple ones where I thought of, like, they're a sidekick. It's like, I don't think they're a sidekick. I think they're, like, someone you journey with, but, like
Yeah.
you
The line can be blurry sometimes. Like one of the ones I wrote down, like as examples of some of my favorites, and I don't think this is more of an honorable mention, but I think someone like Mimir in God of War is a really good example, because I don't know if he's a sidekick. Like Atreus is kind of Kratos' sidekick, but Mimir is another character that's kind of part of your party, and he's more interesting in terms of what he has to say and the lore building and his
Yeah.
humor.
You know what's amazing is Mimir is literally the first person I thought of. And
Yeah.
then it's 'cause he's such a wonderful, like, companion, but I put him more as, like, well, he's a companion, like,
Yeah.
he's on the journey with you, and I would say even Atreus to me doesn't feel like a sidekick. Like, I think he is in some ways, like, he's got the gameplay relevance, he's got mechanics, he's, like, he's along the journey with you, he's, like, a good foil, but I almost, like, and maybe this is just me, like, kind of being a little bit of, like, a idealistic romantic, but I kind of see him more as, like, he's a companion, like, you're on the journey together, like, and yeah, there's a power dynamic that obviously it's like, Kratos is in charge, but I think they kind of grow together, and I like the idea that maybe, like, he's not a maybe he is a psychic. I don't
It's a loose definition, but I don't know.
for sure, but
Anyway,
yeah,
let's maybe
definitely.
talk about some of our favorite sidekicks in
Mhm.
games and what we have to say about those. So, do you have one that really stands out? Like, where do you want to start?
Okay, well, I'm gonna do a shout out, and this is not my pick, but I wanna defend Navi from,
Really, really.
Ocarina of Time, because people talk smack about Navi all the time, and Navi's one of, like, the quintessential OG sidekicks,
So,
and
so
everyone's
what
like,
makes Navi a sidekick rather
um
than like a, I don't know. Is Navi with you all the time in Zelda?
Abby is with you all the time in Ocarina of Time. You get her right at the beginning. She's like a fairy that gets assigned to you to help you on your journey. And so it isn't so much really like I think what puts her as a sidekick to me is it's not really her journey. She's there to assist you. It's not a journey you necessarily like undertake together, kind of like Kratos and Atreus, where they're like, we are gonna go and spread Mother's ashes together. Like this is something we're kind of doing mutually. Whereas Navi's like, I'm helping you on your journey. So
Right.
maybe
Okay.
that's in my mind where I draw the distinction. And people make fun of her because she's annoying, like, hey, listen, like
It's a meme at this point, hey.
is a meme. But you know what? Like when I played the game, I went into it because I didn't play the game as a kid. I played the game as an adult, and I went into it knowing the reputation, and I was like, this is severely like disproportionate to how I feel. Like, sure, she calls out like a few times, especially if you're stuck and not making progress. But I didn't think she was anywhere near as annoying as people claimed. And I kind of got a little bit of attachment to her, specifically, actually, even in the sequel game, you kind of like she doesn't end up in the game, but you sort of how the game kicks off and how you get lost at the start of the sequel is you're actually looking for Navi because you've lost her after Ocarina. And so like that kind of hammers in that like Link has an attachment to her, so then I felt a bit of a strong attachment. And she's also the Z targeting in that game. That's how you use the lock-on mechanic, which like Ocarina is kind of one of the first games that made that sort of like quintessential like now we see in most action RPGs like you lock on to an enemy when you fight them.
I had
Or
no idea that was Navi. I'm gonna be
that's
honest.
Navi, that's how that mechanic works. It's really, really cool. So it isn't just like lock on, it's specifically Navi goes and she's like highlighting the enemy for you. Or like you can lock on to talk to an NPC or something. So like I think that's so cool that they explain what's just like a common gameplay feature now, but they've explained it like through the character of Navi. So like I want to say that Navi is absolutely, she doesn't deserve the hate she gets. I think she's a creative, wonderful tool that was used in that game. And Navi's a great
That's
sidekick.
a that's a good argument. I like that. And,
Yeah.
and I, especially with the targeting, I didn't know that was to do with
Yeah.
her, so that's cool. Um,
Mhm.
I'd like to give a shout out more to a studio than to a certain character, but I think it's hard to talk about modern games, especially on a PlayStation podcast, when you're talking about sidekicks and side characters, without bringing up Naughty Dog. They're whether you talk about Uncharted or The Last of Us with Ellie, I think the argument could be made Ellie is maybe a bit more than a sidekick in the Uncharted, but I mean, or sorry, in The Last of Us.
In the last one.
But especially in The Last of Us 1, I would say she's kind of a sidekick to Joel. And then Naughty Dog, of course, Nate has like Sully, Chloe, Nadine, and just kind of, especially with Sully, kind of the back and forth banter that they have, like you'd mentioned, even in Fortune Hunter, and how he's kind of a mentor, but it's Drake's adventure. Sully's there more as an assist. It's just kind of a
Mhm.
retired fortune hunter, and they really provide a lot of context to the world, and they foil Nate really well, because they offer a bit of humanity to him as a character in terms of his personal life and maybe some of his ambitions and his backstory, that if they weren't there to have those conversations with Nate, I feel like he would just come across as a very one-dimensional action hero kind of guy. But his side characters, like Sully, I would say Sully and maybe Chloe a little bit more than the other ones, but they really add those contextual conversations to him as a person.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think they also do a good job, like we said, of kind of like making more dialogue for the player, because if you think about Uncharted without those extra characters, it's just kind of like Nate going through the jungle. You kind of would lose out on the sense of like a lot of the writing and the like personality of Nate, because it's like like you're just climbing up ruins, finding treasure, and then like okay, you're done. But like with Sully, like yeah, like there's banter back and forth with Chloe, then like he gets into more like complicated relationships, and it helps to kind of like make Nate feel like a character, as opposed to like just a generic like silent protagonist action hero, which like like it's such a shame because Nate's such a like an iconic character, but he's iconic because you get to hear him interact and quip with these other characters.
Yeah, the more like I've played most of the Uncharted games now. I think I've actually played all of them except for Golden Abyss on the Vita, which is like,
And
maybe
and
one day. And
Hunter.
Fortune Hunter, that's true. And Fortune Hunter. But I mean, when I think of Uncharted, there's not really, aside from those big set piece action kind of, like the train on Uncharted 2, or there's a few other big examples like the car in Uncharted 4. The Jeep chase is really cool, but overall, like the parts of Uncharted that stick with you aren't really the action or the combat and stuff like that. It is the characters and the people and the music,
Mhm.
like we were saying, even, which is more iconic to me. And so that, I think, speaks to the quality of the cast, and that includes Nate's side characters as well. And then just quickly, like Ellie as well as a sidekick in The Last of Us, she really is the player's context into what happened during the outbreak, because there is that time jump kind of at the start, and she's asking questions like about what the world was like before, and then that gives Joel the excuse to get into some context of how the world has changed after the zombie outbreak that otherwise he would never have a reason to talk about. Or Ellie being fascinated that people used to collect comic books, and Joel would never tell you about that without her around. So she's amazing in terms of world building through her questions.
She is, and I think like the whole game centers around their relationship too. Like they're so quintessential to the experience and how they kind of like open up and build their relationship. Like that's I think like the gameplay in Last of Us is great. Like there's a lot of things going for that game, but I think like the main takeaway that a lot of people have is just the how those two grow together and their relationship. And I think that's kind of like what sticks with you from that game, and it's at least for me, like that's what got me interested and is like my if I had to pick one aspect of the game, that would be it to keep. So I think, yeah, and again, I got into this man. He's like, well, is she a sidekick? Because you do get to play
Yeah,
as
she's
her,
a little more.
and she's I don't know, like but anyway, maybe that's just maybe those arguments are that she's an amazing sidekick instead of just like a sidekick that could be removed from the
Well,
game.
I think it's like it's not that you shouldn't be able to play as a sidekick, because like
Yeah.
Luigi is definitely Mario's sidekick and he's playable.
Okay. You're right.
So
Okay. That's a
it's
good
not like
argument.
a hard rule that they can't be a playable character. They just can't be the main character.
Yeah, okay. Okay. I think I like it. I think Ellie is kind of like the probably best sidekick ever made, and I don't know if I can top that. But I have one more I've written down as kind of like my final answer to this question, and I think part of it is, so I've been playing and I'm sure I'll talk about it on a episode, maybe when I finish it, but I'm playing Apollo Justice right
Oh
now,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, from the, Ace Attorney series, which is the first game that, doesn't have you play as Phoenix Wright, who's, like, obviously the quintessential character of this series. And as Apollo, I like Apollo, and you get a sidekick because you always have like in these games, it's always your main character, and then you have like a sidekick that comes around and does all the trials with you and kind of like helps you out, and you play off of them to solve the cases together. And you get a character called Trucy in this one,
Oh,
and
Trucy.
she's your go-to. And I like Apollo and Trucy, and I've been enjoying the game. I think it's great. But the whole time I've been playing, I just keep thinking and comparing them to Phoenix and Maya Fey.
Pause right there. My next one was going to be Maya Fey. I have to say she's got to be one of the greatest sidekicks of all
She's
time.
gotta be. And
There's
so
no way that she's not.
and that's why she's definitively my pick. Well, Trucy's good, but she's not the same as Maya. And Maya and Phoenix just had such a wonderful relationship. Like she gave him all those like stupid nicknames, and they made so many like inside jokes, which is like kind of a thing that like you don't necessarily expect to see in a video game. But like those two characters legitimately had like inside jokes that they made throughout the course of the 3 games you played with them. And even to the point where, like, in Apollo Justice, there's been a couple, like, small references to their inside jokes, and it's been really cute, like a stepladder, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you're investigating, you see one, and they have this dumb joke where Maya had asked, or Phoenix, one of them had asked the other person, like, "What makes, like, a ladder like a step ladder instead of just a regular ladder?" And, like, it was just this dumb joke that they always made, and it's, like, carried on. And, I just I believed in their relationship so much, and then she's also very integral to the gameplay. She's got kind of, some sort of spiritual powers that Phoenix needs to use to solve some puzzles. So I just think she's just like the game excels, and I think a large part of what that game is therefore like being a visual novel is the writing, and I think the two of them just absolutely are like have perfect chemistry, and they're the perfect duo.
They really are, and I think like the game doesn't even have voice acting or animated cutscenes or anything, and the way that they're able to convey those characters' relationship just by a few simple animations and the way that the dialogue is written is something really special, because like you said, you really do feel the chemistry between those characters as you get to
Yeah,
know them. and
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 it
it's Go ahead.
so I was saying, and what's neat too is you get 3 games from them. So, like, when you start out in the first game, like, they're kind of just getting to know each other. So, like, you also get that benefit of going through the series together where you actually, like, get to see them get closer and care about each other more. So, like, their relationship at the beginning of the first game versus their relationship at the end of the 3rd game is quite different, but, like, it really feels natural, and it's really nice to see that grow throughout the games as well, which is something I think the trilogy, like, got to work with a little bit better than, say, maybe just one standalone game.
Yeah, and I like the way Maya's personality really contrasts with Phoenix as well, because for as successful and I mean sometimes he kind of stumbles his way through the cases, but Phoenix is an accomplished lawyer and he's won a lot of cases, but he really
Mhm.
wouldn't be there without Maya because you know at least once or twice every game where she's behind the bench with him, you know, arguing against these cases, she's pushing him and he Phoenix has kind of a attitude of oh my god I'm never going to be able to prove this, you know, and it's always Maya
Mhm.
that he looks across to and she's like no you can't think that way, you know, we don't give up on this, and she always has that extra little push of charisma
Yeah,
or she is the push he needs to be able to reset himself and get through these cases, and otherwise he would have lost a bunch of them without her assistance. And like
yeah,
you said too, she even has the ability to channel her older sister who was Phoenix's mentor and kind of get him through that way as well. So even when it's not her physically using her thoughts and knowledge to push him through, it's then she's able to do this extra
mhm.
channeling thing to push Phoenix through that way. And so they really are like a perfect duo for what they're trying to accomplish.
Mhm.
I think
Yeah,
they're expertly written.
that's a good point, like, they're kind of opposites, like, Phoenix is a bit more grounded and logical and, like, he's kind of a bit more, like, realistic, whereas Maya's, like, a bit of a, like, kind of she's, like, a little bit more of a dreamer and kind of, like, gets a little bit silly or is maybe a little bit, like, naive in the sense where she's, like, very optimistic instead of realistic sometimes, and, like, she brings him up when he's, like, feeling, like, stuck, and then he kind of grounds her when it's like, "Well, no, we need to, like, look at this a little bit more pragmatically." And so they kind of, like yeah, they do really balance each other out quite nicely, and it's funny, like, it starts off where he's like she makes, like will make a dumb joke or look at something in a kind of more of, like, a childish way because she's a bit younger than him, and he kind of at the start is like, "Okay, like, oh god, like, what am I put up with? Like, I've gotta babysit this dumb girl." And then by the end of it, it's like anytime she kinda goes on, like, kind of a funny little tangent, he's just like, "Aw, she's so sweet." Like,
Yeah,
that, like,
yeah.
affection comes into it, so
Yeah, well, it's like what you're talking about, the development of their relationship, especially over the trilogy. So and beyond the trilogy too, which is cool to see. I think like as we've been talking about this, Maya actually has become a very strong answer for the best sidekick.
Mhm.
I only had one other one written down, which is maybe more personal to me, but I wrote down Clementine from season one of The Walking Dead, Telltale The Walking Dead, as Lee's sidekick. And the more we've kind of had this discussion, I'm not so sure that she's the true form of a sidekick. She's more of like in Lee's care, at least
Mhm.
to start the game, just because I mean she's a small child during the first game, and she does grow, and there's a lot of character development there, and she's living in this harsh world, and she's very helpless at start, and as you go she kind of becomes more helpful for Lee in terms of being someone to bounce ideas off of, or she suggests oh hey maybe we should try this could get us out of that situation. And as the player character, it's up to you if you want to put her in those dangerous positions or not, you know. There's times when you could choose to do things other than what she said, but at the end of the day she really does show a lot of growth, and she's such a brave character, you know, living through a zombie apocalypse and taking that context, and then having this little girl who's basically abandoned and has no one to look out for her, and she just has this trust in Lee. And maybe that's maybe that's a bad decision to trust a stranger, but at the same time I think it shows off her bravery. And you can really see her develop that relationship with Lee as well. Maybe similar to a Phoenix and Maya, but just in a different context.
Mhm.
Not that Clementine's kind of maybe as optimistic or spiritual or quirky as Maya, but in a different context, they have a similar
They
kind of
they
relationship.
they fit the setting of their game a little bit more, like, Phoenix is quite a lighthearted kind of game, it's meant to be a bit goofy and a bit funny, but, despite, it being a lot of murders, but yeah, Walking
Yeah,
Dead is quite a bit more of a,
yeah.
like, a serious and, like, harsher game to play for sure.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I mean Maya, or not Maya, sorry. Clementine obviously goes on to become the main character of the series overall. So I don't think she's a sidekick, which is why she wasn't my answer for best sidekick in terms of
Mhm.
like the whole series. But definitely in The Walking Dead one, she could maybe be classified as that. And so I had to shout her out just because I love that game so much. But
That's
I
fair. That's a game I gotta get around to playing sometime, it
oh
looks really
100%,
special.
100%. But yeah, cheers to you, Mystic Maya, for being the best sidekick we could think of, I guess. I love that we had the same thought on this
Yeah,
one.
we get a lot of like similar. We started with Mimir and kind of worked our way through it. So
And
that's funny.
either
Oftentimes we
it
bring
either
different stuff to the table, but it's nice to see that like Maya truly, really is the best. Who can
well,
top her?
inarguably, you let us know if you guys have another sidekick you think could challenge Mystic Maya. Of course, that could be sent to circlesandsquarespod@gmail.com. If you wanted to write in a listener mail question, just like Matthias did for this episode of the show, which is a very simple one, Kate, but it caused us to have a little bit of problems thinking of answers to, I think, or at least I don't know if you felt like me, but the question is, what game are you ashamed of, either to say you've played or enjoyed the experience? And this is from Matthias. So thank you very much for your question. Kate, what did you come up with for this? I had a challenging time.
I had a challenging time as well, and I think I maybe like took the question in a little bit of a different way. And so I actually struggled to come up with a game that like I don't feel like I felt ashamed of playing any games because at the end of the day, like we talked about earlier in the show, like there's some that are beautiful masterpieces, works of art that are worth study and long discussion. And then there's some games where they're just like, yeah, and relaxing, gonna play like, it's my free time. I don't think it necessarily has to be more than just I enjoyed something. So, there's a couple games that I've played that are like, maybe not the highest quality or a little bit silly, and I've put more hours into them. But I don't really think ashamed is a word I'd like to describe. So instead, I've remembered a kind of time in a game where I felt ashamed playing based on what I'd done, and I'll tell you a fun little story right now. So recently I've played some Demon Souls, and after beating the game, I joined a Discord for Demon Souls, and there's a lot of like online stuff you can do in that game. So it's people kind of like asking and people to help them with certain bosses or to get their world tendency in a certain way, or like looking for PvP. So it's a pretty nice community, and I went on after beating it too and kind of joined the server of people who wanted help with bosses that they were stuck on, because it was fun for me to kind of get to fight some of these bosses again. And also like, I just kind of wanted to give back to the community a little bit, who um wherever I could, and it helped extend the longevity of the game. So I ended up helping a few people. I helped this one guy who was stuck on a boss, and it was so funny because we had to try so many times, like, we couldn't get it. Like, what happens is when you get someone into another person's game, if they die, you get kicked back out. So you can't beat the boss for them, you just help them. And, like, we must have run it back so many times, like, at least, like, 10 times, and he just kept dying, and it was so funny. We ended up kind of, like, we were joking around on Discord, just, like, we weren't in a voice chat, we were just typing, but every time we died, we're like, "Oh my god, like, let's try it again," and it got to the end where he was like, "I'm so sorry, like, I made you do this boss with me so many times, like, I keep dying," and I was like, "Oh, it's fine, like, don't worry," and, um so whatever, it had kind of been a funny experience, and we were like, "Hey, we'll try one more time." Like, it was kind of like the, like, "Let's do it,
This
one
is
last
it. We
go."
got to do it.
Yeah, this is it, one last go. Like, we've been at it for like over an hour at this point now. We're like, "This is the last go," and we were so close. Like, we had it. This was the one we were gonna do, and it was the one time I died. And then after
And you
I
felt
died,
so
he
ashamed.
died, and I felt so ashamed. I was like, "I'm so sorry, man. Like, I can't do it." And it ended
Oh
up we
shit.
never beat it. We never beat it. It ended up being like, "Hey, man, like, I'm so sorry. I've gotta go to bed. Like, it's
Oh
like
man.
1 AM here or something. Like, message me again if you ever want help with it later," and I never heard from him
Oh
again.
yeah. You you had such a bad experience.
He had such a bad time. I don't know if he's ever like, to this day, he might still be fighting that boss, but
We'll never
after
know. We'll
enough,
never
we'll
know.
never know.
Damn. Well, I took the question in a little bit of a different route. I tried to answer it as literally as possible, just trying to think of what I could say I was ashamed of. And the meme answer here is I'm ashamed to say I completed Pokemon Sun and Moon because that game definitely is not the best Pokemon game. And I completed it just because I'm a sucker and will still play anything with that franchise. Of course, a little bit of a joke. It's not actually that terrible. I just my least favorite Pokemon game. As much as we've had to say about Sword and Shield, I think Sun and Moon is the one I would say is the worst. But
The
I don't.
likely to go
Uh,
back to.
yeah, I don't want to bag on it though. That's like a meme answer, like I said. My real answer, I would say it's Mass Effect Andromeda. And I feel
Oh,
like I'm a bit of a champion for this game. Not that I really, really love it, but I just don't think it's quite as bad as people as people make it out to be. And so that's why I added it as my game I'm ashamed of, just because I think it's hard to defend it without kind of getting looked down upon by a lot of people. So, but I really don't think it's that bad, you know, like people make fun of it. And I think it had an impossible task of living up to the original Mass Effect trilogy, which is one of the most revered trilogies in all of games, for a good reason, because they're amazing. So I think this game was maybe a bit doomed to fail from the start, but it really isn't as bad as people say. Like the combat is pretty much just the same as, you know, very similar at least to the original games, and it adds the ability to fly and around a little bit, which adds a lot of different feeling to the combat. I mean, the guns still feel good. The story is interesting too. Like it takes place between the second and third Mass Effect games and adds a bit more context to the universe, and the story is kind of you being on this arc and going to examine and find inhabitable planets on a new galaxy, and some story stuff kind of goes sideways, so you end up being you know, the leader kind of this expedition, and so you have a bit more agency in that way. And the concept was cool, and you know, it was just let down a little bit by partially expectation and partially some more repetitive kind of sequences. And there's a lot of puzzles where you gotta scan things and kind of run around, and
Yeah,
it's not the most fun.
I have very distinct memories of watching you fight that sandworm monster over and over again.
Oh god, yeah. I think my game glitched, or like, because it wasn't, you have to wait for a certain opening against that boss before you can attack it. And I remember I must have been like 15 minutes or maybe 10-15 minutes. I was just waiting for it to do that certain attack, and it wouldn't do it. And it's just so frustrating.
Yeah,
But
and I think that's also the thing too that kind of killed that game. The game was dead in the water for a lot of reasons, but the, like, marketing leading up to it with those horrible facial animations, and, like, it was maybe, like, a little bit buggy when it came out, and I think it was just one of those things that it shot itself in the foot too many times before it came out, and then the final product maybe wasn't as good as it should have been on top of that, and it was just like a comedy of errors getting that game to actually,
yeah.
like, appreciate it in any sense. So I'm sure it wasn't as bad as its reputation precedes it, but I'm sure also it was, you know, would have been nice to have something a little bit a higher quality package considering how big of a franchise Mass Effect is.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I was hoping for more out of it too, and I'm not defending saying it's awesome, but definitely, I think I'm one of the more positive people on it compared to a lot of people's opinions, and so they would probably be ashamed on my behalf. But I personally would I don't know. I couldn't really think of another answer aside of that, to be honest. So that'll be the best I can do for being ashamed. But yeah, I mean, that's good. Maybe that says something about us having reasonably good taste in what we choose to play. Like
Yeah,
we don't get
either we have
ashamed by too
really
much.
good taste or we have reasonably low expectations of ourselves.
Maybe a combination of both. I don't know.
Somewhere in the middle.
But anyways, Kate, this has been a fun episode. Good
Hmm.
chat, good talk. I like the Mystic Maya pick. That was great. And
Mhm. And I really wanna hear if anyone has, anyone they think can top her, because I think at this point, we are very convinced that that's just S tier and there's no stopping her. So, um, please,
yeah,
yeah, write in, let us know if you've got a different pick, who would be your all-time sidekick.
yeah, let us know. That'd be really great. So yeah, anyway, that's gonna do us for the show today. Like we said, we've got a big episode coming up next time on May 17th, which is our 1-year anniversary episode, so look out for that. But until next time, everyone, thank you for listening, and we'll see you then. The intro and outro music for Circles and Squares was produced by friend of the show, Matthew Chan. Interlude music is from Scott Gratton of the Free Music Archive. Our channel art was created by @unreasonable on Twitter, and our brother Alex is the designer of the Circles and Squares logo. Thank you all for listening and supporting the show.